I push
What's
this?
I know Al is coming on to Peggy, but don't
Okay.
wait.
Okay, thank you. Very good. And where's Skip? I lost Skip. Oh, there you are. Hi, Skip. All right, so welcome everyone. Those who are not familiar with it, we have a dream. We meet usually the third Wednesday of every month. We've been doing that since September of 2020. So we're very happy that you joined us. So thank you. And thank you also because we're very happy tonight to have Jack Gone, who is the playwright of the play that many of us saw. How many of you saw it? Can you just raise your hand if you did? Yeah, that's great. That's wonderful. Anyway, he will, if you didn't see it, don't worry about it. He will summarize it and he'll be answering questions about his play, what was done, that many of us were blessed to see. But first, as always, we want to begin with a prayer. And as we continue to work against injustices up to and including loss of breath, I'm going to say a prayer that Father Ray wrote after George Floyd's murder. I thought it was appropriate for our topic tonight. So I'm going to he couldn't be here tonight. He was planning on it and planning on doing a prayer, but I thought in his absence, I would read the one that he wrote. Come, breath of divine life, come. Breath of God, rush upon me. Let me breathe you deeply into my own being. Refresh my spiritual lungs so I can truly be a living being, so I can be as you, breathing the breath of life into every person I encounter. Make my breath strong. Make my heart great and generous. Make me take up my privileged task. Let my breath join with yours, causing being wherever you and I turn. And forgive and heal our failures to breathe in your breath, to breathe with hope and promise into the lives of others, and heal the one from whom we have taken away their sacred breath, bestowed by you, God, Creator, Sustainer, and Fulfiller. Come, breath of God, come. So the ongoing racism that we continue to see around us each day had its roots in many deliberate actions, some subtle and some not. And Jack's play depicts one path men took. So I hope you had a chance to read the info that I sent with the Zoom if you weren't able to see the play. But if not, we have Jack, so it's not a problem. So Jack, thank you so much for joining us. And more importantly, thank you for the powerful play that you wrote. It really touched us. And so the Zoom is yours.
Okay. Well, thank you. And I'm so pleased to see everyone here. I'm going to take a few minutes to summarize the action of my play, what was done, because I know that not all of you have seen it, and also because even if you have, a reminder may help structure the discussion. And after that, I'm going to stand back and mostly only speak when spoken to. This is your discussion, and I'm primarily here to help. So let's get right down to it. It's spring 1978 in rural Charles County, Maryland. Deirdre, a Washington-based white historian working on grant money to begin research on a dissertation about lynchings in this state, is killing two birds with one stone, visiting farmland where the last Maryland lynching happened in 1933, and stopping by her Uncle Selby's home. The visit to the farmland seems unproductive. There are no traces of the victim, a black farmer named Jefferson Monroe. His house and outbuildings are gone. There's nothing to show anyone ever lived there. Mike, the surveyor Deirdre is hired to help her, can only give her an approximate location for the property boundaries based on an old tax map, as there seemed to be no deeds showing how Monroe came to own the field, or for that matter, stopped owning it, or how it came to be in anyone else's hands. Deirdre shows him a lynching postcard, which is a souvenir photo of the crowd and Monroe's corpse. Such photos were common in U.S. lynchings. Mike asks her to put it away. In passing, Mike mentions an anomaly in the tax records. Monroe was paying taxes on the land until 1933, but in 1934, the taxes started being paid by someone named Weeks. Deirdre expresses surprise as her uncle is related to some Weekses. Mike doesn't know which Weeks is paying the taxes, but he promises to find out for her. In the next scene, Deirdre visits her uncle. It quickly becomes apparent he's a loyal and caring uncle, and also a terrible racist, with a dim view of Deirdre's lifestyle and life choices. Some aspects of his background are revealed over the course of the play. He's a Bostonian from a working to middle class neighborhood, but went to an elite Boston high school and attended Harvard, and is a decorated Korea War veteran now working as a contracting officer at the Patuxent Naval Air Station. He's out of step with the rest of the family's racial attitudes. He thinks that Deirdre's relationship with her black boyfriend Alex must be the result of some sexual obsession with black men, because otherwise he can't fathom why an intelligent white woman would get involved with him, particularly as they haven't married and don't live together, as Alex travels for work. Selby also takes a dim view of Alice's work, registering Southern black voters whom Selby calls unqualified to vote. Likewise, Selby can't understand why Deirdre would name her son Kibuka after an Ugandan war god. Uncle Selby announces he's going to go right on addressing the 14-year-old biracial son as Kevin. Selby's expressions of racial disgust are delivered intertwined with what seems like genuine concern for Deirdre. He also has little sympathy for her research. He dismisses it as having to do with other people's concerns, not hers or her family's. Her response amounts to her credo. It is the story of my people. Alex and Kibuka's people were killed, but my people killed them, my people and yours. She adds that lynchings are part of the reason white people run the show in the country, though she does admit that explaining that matter would be a lengthy process. Deirdre also interrogates Selby about his own marriage. His wife Hunter does not live with him regularly at his shack in Charles County, but instead dwells in a more ship-shaped place in nearby Calvert County. He responds simply that he may not be so good at love and marriage. Mike, the surveyor, calls in and says that he's found that the current taxes on the parcel have been paid by Tracy Weeks, the very Weeks who is Hunter's brother and Selby's best friend, a fellow Korea veteran and now a gentleman farmer. Selby confirms that Tracy is the owner of the farm, part of an estate called Mount Grace. Hunter herself arrives at this moment, and she and Deirdre clash. Deirdre asks if she knows anything about Jefferson Monroe or his lynching. She denies knowledge. Deirdre likewise asks how the Weekses and Monroe both seem to own the same parcel, and Hunter dismisses the question, saying the Weekses have owned the land since 1840. She adds that maybe her brother Tracy can shed more light on the issue, and Deirdre, who must leave promptly, vows to return the following weekend to meet Tracy and to ask him. After Deirdre departs, Hunter urges her husband to discourage Deirdre's research. When Selby demurs, Hunter grows angry and says she's leaving. Hunter leaves, and Tracy arrives at about the same moment. When Selby and Tracy are alone, Selby asks Tracy about the apparent conflicting claims on the land, and he says it must be some error on Deirdre's part. They reminisce together about old times and then go off to enjoy some crabs together. In the meantime, Deirdre arrives back at her apartment in Washington, where Alex, on a visit home, is looking after their son Kibuka after school. It quickly becomes apparent that Deirdre and Alex have a deep bond, despite not living under the same roof, and that they share pleasure in their son, who is thriving, and not above asking pointed questions of his parents. Similarly, Alex and Deirdre have plenty of disagreements of their own, including the extent to which Kibuka should be shielded from the grim subject matter of Deirdre's studies. While dinner is being prepared, Mike the surveyor calls again. He has found the 1867 deed by which Hiram Weeks, Tracy's great-grandfather, sold a piece of Mount Grace to Jefferson's grandfather, which in time became Jefferson's farm. Deirdre realizes that this means that when the Weekses took over the farm in 1933, they were getting back land they'd sold to the Monroes in 1867, which Mike confirms. Alex overhears Deirdre's end of her conversation with Mike and is stunned. He reveals that Jefferson Monroe was his own father. Deirdre objects that that is not possible, that she's met Alex's father. He corrects her. That was his stepfather. His mother, who had fled the farm with an infant Alex when her husband had been lynched, was reluctant to discuss it, and so Alex had never done so either. Deirdre realizes that this means that the story she has been studying as if it were someone else's story is in fact the tale of the family of her lover and son. Alex then tells more of the story based on what his mother had revealed to him. Jefferson's grandfather, Augustus Monroe, who had bought the farm from Hiram Weeks, his former slave master, was also buying it from his natural father. They process this information together. It might appear like a lot of coincidences, but Alex sums up the demographic realities. He says, "It's only one coincidence, D. You can assume, unless you know better, that any black person you meet is going to be the descendant of at least one slaveholder. And you can assume that any white person you meet whose family didn't just get off the boat is going to have a family connection with a slaveholder too. So there was only one coincidence, that your family's slaveholder and our family's slaveholder happened to be the same person. That's all the coincidence there is in this situation. And in an area as small as Southern Maryland and DC, even that part is not such a big coincidence. It isn't surprising, not at all." Kibuka, meanwhile, is forging ahead, asking if this information doesn't mean that Jefferson's farm belongs to his family. Alex acknowledges that his son is probably right in theory, but that and 50 cents will get him a ride on the bus. Kibuka accepts this and then, with the cheerfulness of youth, runs off to watch Soul Train, leaving Alex and Deirdre to reflect on their relationship. We learn that they met and their love began in the midst of Freedom Summer, that frightening and inspiring time in the middle of 1964, when college students went south to register voters. Alex wishes that Deirdre had stayed in the South organizing with him, and Deirdre warns Alex that he has little time left to participate in raising Kibuka in Washington. It's an impasse they can't resolve. What they have left is their passion for each other, and the scene ends with them headed off to the bedroom to, quote, remind each other a little bit more. The scene shifts to the manor house of Mount Grace, where Tracy, Hunter, and Selby greet Deirdre. The scene is played out much like a courtroom cross-examination, as Deirdre cuts through each of the lies Tracy and Hunter are telling. Tracy relies upon family portraits to tell his preferred version of the family history, and Deirdre relies on other documentation to undo it. She displays the 1867 deed to prove that Jefferson owned the farm where he was lynched and that Tracy's father didn't own it. And that the lynching occurred just as described, is illustrated by a New York Times article. Finally, in the coup de grace, she proves that Tracy's father, and indeed Tracy himself, were present at the lynching, as established by the obvious resemblance of a man and a boy in the 1933 lynching photo to the portrait of Tracy's father on the wall and Tracy's own appearance. Tracy, cornered, advances on Deirdre intimidatingly, and she flees, letting him know, however, that she considers him a horrible person. That ends the first half. The second half picks up in the exact same place as the first left off, but the status is we now know what was done. Two questions remain. Why was it done, and what do we do with this knowledge? It falls to Selby to learn the answer to the question, why was it done? Now it's Selby's turn to play interrogator. I've been asked to read something of the speech in which Tracy answers it. Tracy's answer, taken as a whole, is racism, theoretical and practical, and ultimately apocalyptic. It's meant to be horrifying. I'm not going to read it all because it's long, but I have been asked to give you the flavor of it. Selby starts out, "You mean you were actually there? You told me you'd never heard of him. You lied to me." Tracy says, "You need to know, sport. You weren't read into this program." Selby, there isn't any program. This wasn't like about national defense." Tracy says, "You don't think so? Don't you think that the preservation of the white race is a matter of national defense? Look around you, Selby. For hundreds of years in this land, the proper dominant role of the white folk was assured and understood to stand outside and above the mere written law. But now what do we see? Rampant rebellion against this law of nature. Negroes seeking to enter all our institutions on a basis of equality, doing violence to the entire organization of our society. Sometimes violence must be met with violence. You can readily understand that the curative and healing violence my father and his friends organized could only have been planned and executed, and the fruits of that violence could only have been fulfilled in secret. And that secrecy is why I could not be as candid as I would have wished with you. It was certainly not from any lack of esteem for an old comrade and kinsman." Selby responds, "What are you saying? What fruits? The man died, that's all." Hunter adds, "There were fruits." Tracy, "Your niece, in fact, reminded us of the most difficult fact that faced my father at that moment. It was the deed she showed us. Can you conceive the kind of defeat that deed had represented to our family?" Selby points to the portrait of Hiram. "You mean that your great-grandfather had to sell off part of his farm?" Tracy clarifies, and here I'm just going to paraphrase. It was the sale to an unacknowledged black branch of the family. It was the humiliation of seeing that branch be better farmers, and the Monroes insisting on being considered the equals of the white half of the family and of the county." Tracy says, "So you can see the unsatisfactory state of affairs that resulted from all this. We have this overweening Negro lording it over a part of the estate as if it were his own, which in point of legal title it unfortunately was. And during Hiram's later years, even with Blair's interventions, I'm told that Black Augustus consistently realized a better reward on his crops than did his father. When my grandfather Blair succeeded to Hiram's title, and after Blair brought the estate more onto a business footing, he therefore repeatedly tried to buy out Augustus with a fair offer and was always refused. And when it came to the next generations, things were no better. Now, what was to be done? The situation had grown intolerable. Brock, my father, began to be insistent, as was his right. It was not fitting that a man of color fail to consider the social order and yield when faced with such a demand. He could have walked away with the value of the farmstead in his pocket, but he would not. Hunter says he had to be removed." Tracy, "So one night my father and some friends paid Mr. Monroe a visit. They made plain to him that refusal was no longer an option, and that if he persisted in his obstinacy, they would find a different way of removing him and his family. It was spelled out that he had 24 hours to vacate voluntarily. And so now we come to that scene in your niece's photograph. My father was not given to baseless boast. He knew that he could count on the support, participation, and silence of at least 200 local families when he moved against Mr. Monroe. And on the following night, they joined him with their torches and their shotgun and their kindling and their rope. And as your niece divined, I was among them with my father. I was, of course, too young to do the killing, but I was there and glad to be there. A blot of 2 generations standing was being erased from our escutcheon, and young as I was, I had been brought there to witness it. That night, then, an ancient wrong was made right, and the Weeks family once more held sway over all of Mount Grace. At last, things were as they always should have been." Selby remarks a little later that Tracy and his neighbors killed a man. Tracy responds, "Well, I myself did not kill anyone. I was too young to have done the deed or to have borne the responsibility. I approve of what was done, though I did not do it. But to use the phrase, kill a man, suggests that Mr. Monroe was entitled to be considered a man as you and I are considered to be such. I cannot accept that equivalence, and neither should you. Selby asks, what was he then? Tracy says, I'm not a scientist or a philosopher, Selby. I only know that putting him down was not killing a man. This, of course, is the necessary fallacy of racism, that the person on the other side is not fully human as compared to us. It is not made clear at all where Selby is coming down on this point of view, but he seems to be questioning it. We return to Deirdre's apartment. I'm not going to go into this scene in such detail because it's full of raised voices and recriminations, drama more than discourse. Briefly, Deirdre reveals two things to Alex and Kabuka. The first is that the old deed makes clear that the Weekses have known since the lynching that they were farming land stolen from Monroe and his family. Second, Deirdre shows Alex the lynching photo in light of what it proves about Tracy, and Alex explodes. Selby arrives, trying to make matters better, but with Alex in his current traumatized state, Selby only makes them worse. Alex storms out of the room and Deirdre follows, making room for a dialogue between Selby and Kabuka. Selby has brought a lacrosse stick as a gift for Kabuka, which has not been enthusiastically received. Left alone, they discuss it. Selby asks, do you want me to stop giving you presents? Kabuka, well, no more lacrosse sticks, truthfully. You do understand that it's mostly white guys who play that sport? Selby, so what? Kabuka, and I'm not. It's not a present for me. Even if mom's white, I'm not. And when you give me a lacrosse stick, you're telling me you wish I were white too. Selby, I didn't mean it that way. Kabuka, maybe not, but that's how it comes across to me. It's like I'm your little relative and you're trying to love me. And so you're focusing on something to hitch that love to, but it's not something that's really a part of me. Selby, there's nothing white in you? Kabuka, there's only me in me, Uncle Selby. What I need you to do is deal with the whole boy in front of you. If you can't do that, let's call it a day. I know you love my mom, and I'm glad for her. You can leave it at that. Shortly after Kabuka makes that point, Selby comes to a decision to reveal to Deirdre and Alex information he alone possesses. He urges them to return to the room, and they do. Selby discloses that Tracy's father initiated the lynching to grab Jefferson's land. Deirdre notes that her studies have revealed that this was quite a common motivation for lynchings. After further friction between Alex and Selby, Selby departs. Deirdre ends the scene by proposing, without providing details, that she and Kabuka and Alex go on a pilgrimage the next day, and they agree. There follows a scene at Mount Grace later that day. It begins just as Selby arrives back from Washington. He reports that his family ties in Washington are fraying. Tracy shows some sympathy, but is unperturbed about any consequences he might face from Deirdre's awareness of the history, because legal rules and doctrines make it impossible that he could be sued or prosecuted. He tops off his expressions of complacency by saying that the country is full of men like his father, and that whatever the efforts to bring about racial equality, there will always be people like his father to push back. He predicts that the president himself will soon be someone like his father. Tracy prophesies that this president will reverse all race leveling and recommit the country to explicit oppression and exclusion of non-white peoples. The audience is free to apply this foreshadowing to whatever president it deems best. Tracy proposes a toast to that foretold demagogue. It's unclear as of the end of the scene whether Selby will join in that toast or not. The final scene plays out with Alex, Kabuka, and Deirdre back at the site of Jefferson Monroe's farmstead. Alex and Kabuka entertain thoughts of how much better the family's fortunes would have been had the hillside belonged in their family. Alex begins to rally everyone's spirits by acknowledging the family's setback, but not acknowledging defeat. Then Selby unexpectedly turns up, invited, he assures them, by Deirdre. He then announces that he's changed his mind about some things he can no longer stay on the fence about, like what he calls all this, as he waves his hand at the hillside. He can no longer consider the lynching all right under any yardstick. He reveals that he did not end up drinking Tracy's toast. Instead, he proposes to have a toast with Alex, Deirdre, and Kabuka drinking to Jefferson's memory. Alex is torn, but ultimately accepts the glass from Selby and lets Kabuka know he may do so too. Selby notes that Jefferson must have died in agony, but he certainly deserved to die with pride in his heart notwithstanding. And the others echo Selby's invocation of Jefferson's name. Selby states how he wants to move forward. He intends to stay friends with his friends, but also calling Kabuka by his present name now, his correct name rather. He wants to go on giving Kabuka presents if Alex will permit. Alex responds, "I will not lie to you. I still hate your choice of friends, but I won't close doors to a man who offers a toast to my father." And then Alex offers a toast of his own, recognizing himself and Deirdre as Kabuka as Jefferson's reconstituted family, for whom he prophesies hard work and achievement in reaping new kinds of harvests. At that point, everyone falls silent. In collecting a cup from Alex, Selby holds out his hand, and Alex, after some hesitation, takes it. Alex and Kabuka depart together, and after Selby hugs Deirdre, he gestures for her to follow them. Selby remains, looking up at the hillside and contemplating what was done. That's what happens in the play. And I think people may want to unmute themselves.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jack. So Jack has said that he would be happy to answer questions. So I know this is a questioning group, so feel free. Might want to take a minute. It's powerful. It's a lot to take in. Some of us have had an advantage because we saw it, and so we've lived with it for a while. But to those who just heard the summary, it's traumatizing. So anyway, so if you want to either use your little yellow hand or just raise your hand, and we will call on you. Can't believe this group has no questions. There you go, Marianne.
Thank you, Jack.
Sure.
I was privileged to be at the performance where there was a talk back with the audience, and the cast and Jack and the director. And I still play with the question of the final handshake. The Shelby offering and Alex taking time before he actually does. And of course, you know, there were people who reacted and said, you know, that's not realistic for Alex to have decided to do that so quickly. And then there was a question of, but how much longer did you want the play to go while he made up his mind? But the you know, what, I don't know if I have a question so much as I can't imagine what it takes for somebody like Alex to extend his hand after all the pain. And yet I don't think the play could have finished any differently. Can you share any thoughts you had about writing that moment or?
Yeah, sure. First of all, I will tell you that that scene was the one that was the subject of the most dialogue during the rehearsal process. The director, believe it or not, originally wanted to have to stage the reconciliation as coming much more quickly and easily. I was the one who held out to make it painfully slow, but apparently not painfully enough for everyone else. And I understand and respect that. I guess my response is you have to look at the family dynamics that are going on there. Deirdre's made it very plain that she's going to take it very much amiss if Selby is banned from the family door. If Alex, and to a lesser extent Kabuka, want to successfully navigate this environment, they're going to have to think hard if they want to reject Selby. The other thing is, although Selby's turnabout isn't announced until that last scene, it's very easy to see that it's been foreshadowed actually from the third scene on. He is, by his lights, an honorable guy who will accept evidence eventually and follow it where it leads. And the evidence of this very decent trio, Alex, Kabuka, and Deirdre, it is such a challenge to such a powerful challenge to Selby's preconceived notions that if he's being honest with himself, he's got nowhere else to go. And seeing his best friend revealed as a monster is likewise a sort of powerful stimulus to him to move in that direction. Now, if you can accept that he did that, then perhaps Alex can accept it too. The evidence is sketched out in that final scene, but it's not ambiguous. The only thing is, Selby, is not agreeing that he's going to, disown his brother-in-law and his wife. And you can see that that would be pretty much as difficult as for Deirdre to disown him. So I think it's probably fair to say that it's not just, considerations of the brotherhood of humanity or welcoming back the sinner who departed from the fold. It's also a matter of the fact that these people are literally compelled to live together if they want to live with other people that they want to live with even more.
Thank you.
Maureen.
Hi, Jack.
Hi.
You mentioned the word reconciliation. Is it reconciliation? Is it forgiveness? Did you think about those two different things? And do you have any thoughts about reconciliation and forgiveness?
That is a good question. Let's see. I guess off the top of my head, I would say it's both. Don't forget that Alex has been traumatized, but in that less secure frame of mind, he also recognizes, or I ought to, that Selby is offering actual allyship. It's imperfect. He's certainly not turning his back on his friends, but he's willing to take that very hard spot in the middle, and to the extent there are consequences, there are preferences that he has to accept. He's signaling, at least in my eyes, he's signaling he's willing to do them. So I think that the preconditions for reconciliation are there. He has already shown himself open to honest discourse with people who don't necessarily agree with him on both sides of this bit of history. And he's also shown himself to genuinely care for Deirdre and also for Kabuka. Those are good reasons to reconcile with him. And Alex gains nothing from standing aloof. He has his own internal incentives to forgive. So I think it's both, probably. But you don't have to agree with me.
Audrey?
Jack, I just wanted to mention, John and I had the opportunity to see the play, and I wanted to mention how stellar the casting was.
Yeah.
The actors that were chosen were just phenomenally good.
Yes.
And the directing, even though we were switching scenes very frequently, the segues were wonderful, physically wonderful. They were written great, but they were physically wonderful too. What has stayed with me is the WYPR reviewer's comment that she didn't like the title of the play, and I have ruminated on that, wondering if I were retitling it, what I would title it, and I came to the conclusion that that title is perfect as it is, because it refers to a culturally accepted practice.
Yes.
It's a historical fact, and finally, it stands as an indictment. So it conveyed so much that I wouldn't know how to replace that. When you read that review, what kind of reaction did you have to that comment by her?
I don't think I had a strong reaction at all. Yeah, I understand why it's a little on the obscure side. My backup title, by the way, would have been Mount Grace, for obvious reasons. But I think not. Now, I should add that I have a bit of a predilection here, which may have come into play more than it should have. I like titles that begin with what. My book of memoirs is What I Was Listening to When, and I've got a short play called What They Say. So, but I think you accurately summarized the arguments for the title that I went with.
Yeah, I agree. I thought it was perfect. Jody?
Thank you. I was not fortunate enough to see the play, so I appreciated the summary. But one of the things that has stuck with me and that I just thought was very well put in the play was the lacrosse stick, because it just signifies, even with all the horror of lynching and everything, just that continued sadness that these whites or this white person really maybe does want it to be easier and everybody to be white. And I feel like that's such a strong sense of what we see in this world.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, I found that very moving. So,
yeah, thank you.
Maureen?
I was able to see the play. I went to it with a woman that I went to college with, so we've known each other more than 50 years, and she's Black. And at one point, well, at the end of the play, she ended up talking with two women who were also in like the front row, and also I believe they were both women of color. I don't recall exactly, one at least was. So they immediately engaged with my friend as being someone who's Black and was there. But my friend did say to me that she thought this was a play, a message and a play for white people.
Yes, I don't dispute that. My feeling is that there has to be a lot of dialogue within the white community. and this play ought to be part of that. It was intended to be part of that. That's not to say that I've excluded anyone else. But to the extent that your friends were saying something more, namely that they felt a little put off by something there. Okay. But I would be sorry if that were the case. I tried to be as respectful as I could of.
Yeah, no, I don't think that was her response. I just was interested that she
Yeah.
felt like, oh,
Yeah.
this is a message for white people.
Yes, it
White
is.
people need to know
Yeah.
this. And I just thought that was so frank and clear from her. Yeah.
Yeah, that passage I read you from Deirdre, it was Alex and Kabuka's people who got killed. It was my people who killed them. That is the sort of the essence of it, boiled down from the vast multifarious history we've got here.
Jerry?
Two things. One thing, the lacrosse stick. Just to let you know, I'm sure you know it's no longer the case. At least the Gilman School up here, everybody plays lacrosse. It's like the school symbol is a lacrosse stick. Okay, but first of all, I want to say hi, Jack. It's good to see you outside of the gym.
We run into each other there all the time.
Yes, we do. And I just have a quick question. Did you write a back, or do you, when you write plays, like a back biography for your characters, like a short?
Not exactly. Let me tell you a little something about. Did you see the staging of the play?
No, I didn't get it.
Okay, all right. I was going to say that those of you who did see the staging were the beneficiary of lots of back biographies, which I didn't write. We have, as a director, Barry Feinstein, who is an old-fashioned method director, which is to say, he actually studied with Lee Strasberg,
Really?
and he actually studied alongside people like Brando. And the method actor, the method director, attempts to situate the performer within the soul of the character, whoever that character is. And creation of back biographies is a very common part of the preparation of the actors in these situations. I was actually finding myself participating in the process after other people had started it. People were asking me about the sources for these characters in my own life. And I was telling them what I knew, or what I was hoping to have developed through what I knew about these characters before they step on stage. So there was a lot of development of that in this actual production. But the fact that there were so many different ways that these characters could have been played, which became obvious in the rehearsal process, was kind of an eye-opener for me. I mean, I've written a bunch of plays, but not many of them have been performed in a manner. And to see what happens when other people invest their energy and their imagination in your play is to recognize that it's a work that exists to some extent independent of you. And you better respect that. The play has its own demands and its own life.
Thank you.
You. And Mary Lynn, I think you had your hand raised. You're muted.
Yeah.
Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah, I did have the privilege to go and to see the play. And I was really deeply touched by the performance. As the summary says, this is not a real story, but it certainly could be a real story.
Mhm.
And what really brought it home for me, as I remember the play, was when Alex, the black man, responded to the knowledge, that was his father. And that the way that individual portrayed that character was, in my mind, outstanding. The depth, the depth of emotion, the way he just brought it home, like, that was his father that happened to. Yeah. And that postcard was a picture of what had happened to his father,
Right.
And the way people were just like looking like that was something to go and see. But it really was the death of his father, the lynching of his father. Yeah, really, that black man did a superb job. I mean, I almost jumped out of my seat when he was yelling, because it really brought the whole thing home to me in that portrayal. And I have to be honest, on the other side, I really was not aware of the fact that, black men could own property, and then it was taken away from him, and then Alex said, what would my life be? That mansion up on the hill. What would my life be if things were different?
That was an effort to approach a very large subject, not obviously go deep into it, but to approach the large subject of generational wealth.
Yes.
And I believe Alex said something like, white people are always talking about raising themselves up by their bootstraps. And by implication, they're asking, why can't we black people do the same thing, for heaven's sake? And there are many, many explanations to that, but one of them certainly is that if you don't have property to begin with, it's very hard to start the process of acquiring it. Most of us who have some of it have received capital in some way from our families, white or black. We benefit from the efforts that our parents made to advance us in various ways, to advance themselves and leave something behind. And that isn't necessarily the case so much with other groups. This country's been run for the benefit of our group. So I did want to get some of that into the play.
Yeah, and Jack, I'm really glad you did, because it opened my eyes. Even though I have heard about it, on the news, and I had heard about it in conversation, but yeah, when you brought it into the play, it became real.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it really helped me to understand, and it probably helped a lot of other white people to understand that. Yeah, so thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
Rita or Denny?
Mary Lynn's question made me think about something that was kind of never even mentioned in the play, but I guess I kind of assumed it. Do you think that the grandfather bequeathed the property to him because he was his son?
When you say the grandfather, there are several different grandfathers. Whose grandfather are we speaking of now?
Jefferson.
Um, Jefferson?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, the person that willed the property to Alex's father, was he
Oh.
doing that because it was his son and he wanted his, even though his son
Yes.
turned out to be black, instead of looking more like himself, do you think he felt an obligation? It was his son too, to give him part of the property.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, now, okay. So I think what you're asking me is, did Hiram, the progenitor of all of this,
Yes.
did Hiram want to do something for his black son,
Yeah.
unacknowledged black son? I think the
Yeah.
answer could well be yes. It isn't exactly answered. I had the occasion to study rather deeply the story of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings, about whom I've also written a play. It is my belief that whatever hard things one has to say about Jefferson, he did in fact try in various ways to favor his slave sons and daughter. Did this do him credit? Did it do him discredit? That's a very complicated subject and not for tonight. But I think that was a pattern that many times there would be some family feeling there, at least in that first generation. I mean, obviously, where we're talking significant concentrations of wealth, there is a decided lack of interest on the part of the white planter class to let any significant amount of it come to their children. And in this case, and in Jefferson's case, what Jefferson tried to do was give them not land or money, but training, so that they could go out there. They were going to be emancipated, and Jefferson agreed to that with Sally. I mean, we actually know that because of one of Jefferson's sons dictating a memoir to a newspaper editor in the 1870s. That we know that he always anticipated that his sons would be emancipated and that they would have to support themselves. And he sure wasn't going to do it by bequeathing them any of Monticello.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, okay. I nobody has mentioned that, and either in the play or in our discussion, but I just thought it was worth bringing up.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Good question.
Thank you.
Are there any more questions? Mary Ann.
Again, not a question, but I just felt very powerfully, it's something we read about all the time, that a Black dad or a Black mom have to have the talk with their son in particular about how things are. And Alex seems torn because he kind of wants to protect Kabuka from some of that harsh reality, and yet he knows he has to do it. And was his name Pierre, I think?
I'm sorry. You're talking about
Alex.
Pierre was his name.
Yeah. I just said to him afterwards, I said, I wanted to cry when he was struggling with breaking the innocence of his son to tell him, you know, how to keep himself safe, the way things are, and so on. It was a very powerful moment for me.
Jerry?
Yeah, so I think this is so I did not have a chance to see it, Jack, and I deeply regret. And this is maybe less about the content, although everything I've heard is so critically important and moving. And it's more about a question, a comment about your engagement with this. So I listened to you, and you talk about these characters that you created. You created these characters. You wrote the script. They're speaking your words. And then and I'm sure this is probably true of playwrights, you know, all playwrights, all really good playwrights. And then you talk about them as though you're not really sure what the character is feeling or thinking or meaning, and I'm thinking, but you created them. So where do you draw your line? Where do you say, okay, this is what I've done, and now, oh my God, I've created them, and I'm like God, and I've let them out into the world, and I don't know who they are or what they think or what they do. It is fascinating to me. How do you do that? It's just amazing. And I would think frustrating. I'm frustrating. I'm like, Jack, you should tell me what they want, what they think, what they know. You created them. And then you say, well, I don't know this. I don't know what they. So tell me about, how do you do that?
Okay.
How do you do that?
I'll tell you what I can. It is somewhat mysterious, but people are somewhat mysterious. I don't believe there are many people that, at least when you're writing three-dimensional characters, I'm not talking about, you know, the maid who answers the door. I'm talking about three-dimensional principal characters in a play. I don't think there's any way to write them and answer all the questions about them in the text. Even if you've gone to the incredible lengths of completely doing a 360 on them in your own mind. Writing a character who, moreover, who, as many of these characters are, were based in part on real human beings that I knew. It means that you sort of accept the mysteries that they came equipped with. It's never explained, for example, everything that makes Selby and Hunter's marriage work or not work. It's obviously not a functioning marriage as most of us would like to think of marriages, but it is a relationship that is far from a totally dead marriage. Where does the line get drawn? I don't know. I asked the man who was the model for my Uncle Selby to explain how that marriage worked. I got nowhere. I got no useful answer. So it wasn't hard for me to say, okay, I don't have to answer that question with that particular character. And there are other characters who contain things that I haven't explained. And it was a great liberation not to feel that I needed to. This is perhaps the play in which I've largely crossed the bridge into creating characters that way. But I will tell you that most of my plays that deal with real issues, at least, most of those plays, I tend to depict the issues as unresolved and gray. I don't want them neatly resolvable by anybody in the audience. If anything, I want you people saying, damn it, why didn't he come down on one side or the other? So there you go. That's the best I can do.
Thank you, Jack. Mara?
Hi, I'm sorry my camera's not working. I have no idea. It just has a mind of its own.
By the way.
And I didn't see the play and I haven't read the play, which might be helpful to fill in gaps versus, I did read the notes and tried to listen carefully. But there were a couple things that I kind of struggle with. And I struggled with the concept of any onus being on the character Alex to forgive the generational trauma inflicted upon him. And I question that in a very real sense broadly, because I think that that is often put on people of color, which so I really struggle with that. I don't think it's a fair position necessarily that we sometimes put people of color in to make ourselves feel better as white people or more comfortable. I struggled with the lacrosse stick because it's rooted in Indigenous people, another hugely marginalized group, fully understanding who we mostly see play lacrosse and have access to it.
Especially
But
in 1978.
well, it's still rooted in Indigenous people. And also the concept of how we label and define whiteness. So when he responds to it as, this is a white people's game kind of thing, I struggle with that in a lot of ways in a broad sense. I personally have a biracial daughter, so she struggles a lot with, you talk white or you do this. She presents as if you were to meet her, you might say some people think she's Latina, some people, clearly would identify her as Black, but that we ascribe certain qualities, certain things, generally things that are viewed as positive, how one speaks, what sports one plays, how one dresses, certain behaviors as white behaviors. And so as people of color, at least from my hard conversations I've had with my friends and my own daughter, they find it somewhat frustrating. That would be what is a positive quality is like, oh, that's, you're doing this white thing, right? So like that is kind of a struggle I have personally, that just in listening to it and also having read extensively. And I also had my ears perk up on the Jefferson favored certain slaves. He didn't release them. He kept them as slaves. Like, you do not favor a human being necessarily when you are keeping them enslaved, regardless of whether you are training them or anything else. So I struggle with some of that, just as tangentially, I struggle with that. The last lynching in this country was in 1981, so 3 years after the setting of this play. We're really not that far removed from an actual lynching. I mean, kind of, but so those are just some things that I struggle with in bigger questions. And maybe it would all be very clear to me if I actually had it in front of me and could read all the details, or if I'd seen it acted out, I might have a different reaction personally. But I think it's interesting. I definitely can see why someone of color would say it's a white person's play. I feel that. But
and again, I as I say, Maura, I don't run away from that. It is intended to be fundamentally a foundation for inter-white discourse that I think we need. That said, I wish I could answer all of the points in your question, but it had a lot of different features. You said onus on Alex to forgive. If you meant that Alex, the character, was experiencing certain pressures to forgive. Clearly he was. If you mean by that I think that it was appropriate that he be subject to those pressures, I don't think I'm saying that. I'm just saying that was the situation in which he found himself. You reverted to my comments about Jefferson, so let me tell you what I believe I know about Jefferson. And as I say, I've looked hard at Jefferson. The will that Jefferson made, pursuant to his promise with Sally when she was in a position to say, "I'm not coming back to the United States with you." That was when he made the promise to her. The will that Jefferson made did maintain the sons that he still had living with him nominally as slaves for 2 more years, during which time they were to complete their training, basically. This and the de facto manumission of the kids that left before that amounted to special treatment in the context of the way things were run at Monticello. The Jefferson family, when Jefferson died, were possessed of no other slaves who had the ability to walk away after 2 years or anything like it. And in fact, because Jefferson was such a bad investor and had basically squandered the family fortune, they were sold. And you know, if you're going to lay criticisms at Jefferson's feet, that's a big one. He didn't take care of the Black people in his care. That's a serious issue. But I do believe it's fair to say that he did show some favor to those kids. He did it because he promised Sally that he would. But that's nonetheless a form of favor, in my view. You can be dogmatic and doctrinaire and try to make the words mean more than they do. But ordinarily, if you distinguish somebody in a class by giving them additional benefits, and freedom was a benefit, then you have to say that he, quote unquote, favored them. I'm sorry, I can't remember all the points you made in between. Oh yes, about the treatment of Kabuka and his racial identity issues. I agree that there is no reasonable way to make all of that make any sense. We know that the idea that somebody with mixed African and European ancestry is automatically treated as Black is just an artifact of the laws necessary to undergird slavery. They bear no particular resemblance to anything native to human experience or human biology or anything like that. It's not a genetic decision. It was a judicial decision to assure that the children of female slaves, regardless of who their father was, were going to be treated as slaves, because otherwise you would waste a very valuable asset from the point of view of the slaveholding class. Later on, we in our society have adopted this point of view. That later on in slavery, I believe that principle came to be known as the 1 drop rule. Namely, that if a person had 1 drop of Black heritage in their bloodstream, then that was how they should be categorized. And that is the way that society sees people. When Barack Obama became president, or while he was running for president, he sort of laid a lot of emphasis upon the fact that he was partly white and partly black. After he became president, and as lines in particularly party politics hardened against him, he was black. That was the way he was referred to. I think that was the way he looked at himself. So I don't find anything terribly unrealistic about Kibuka seeing himself as black, even though it's a made-up construct. The whole thing is.
Yeah, when we were studying a couple years ago our horrendous history, and we were comparing it to Hitler, we talked about that one drop, and it's appalling. Maureen?
Well, I wanted to say that I think your play raises the question of reparations, and I'm not asking you, Jack, in particular to answer to reparations, but I just thought if anybody had some thought about the thing of reparations. And regarding the one drop thing, I think in Louisiana, where they did codify these things very carefully, it went to 1/16. So if you have one grandparent, you're 1/4 black. If you have one great grand, you are 1/8. So if you have one great grandparent who was black, then you are black. Louisiana went to a lot of trouble to figure all of these things out. Other states didn't do so much. But I just wanted to raise the topic of reparations. If anybody wants to say anything about reparations. I'm thinking about Monroe, Jefferson, Alex. And is there any claim he could make on anything? But that prompted me to think about the wider question of reparations.
I'll just say this about that. He certainly does not end up clinging to the notion that reparations are coming. He is obviously determined to move on, which I think is the sensible thing under the circumstances. But was he being would he have been entitled, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Yes, I certainly believe he would have been entitled to reparations without a doubt, and we ought to be talking about reparations. Go ahead.
Can I just like a contemporary example? I'm noticing Maura's comment in the chat about the lacrosse thing, but I just want to say, I think it was the Baltimore Sun did a comparison. Many of you are familiar with the houses on Edmondson Avenue and that the houses in Rogers Forge, that they were built by the same developer. They are the same years. They are exactly the same houses, but I think the houses on Edmondson Avenue are worth about 1/4 of the houses in Rogers Forge. And how can we address that? Because that's the inherited wealth of the African American family that moved to West Baltimore, as opposed to the white families that moved to Towson.
Yeah. I think I saw a comment about this flash by. Yes, about Hitler from Mara again. Mm-hmm. Yes, a trip I took to the Holocaust Museum earlier this year sort of drove that home for me. They have a chart there on the wall. I think it's an original German language Nazi chart saying how the law is to treat people with mixed ancestry Christian and Jewish, or at any rate, Jewish and non-Jewish. And it is absolutely chilling. And it certainly had a powerful impression on me, as I have one Jewish and one Catholic parent, and would unquestionably have been on the outs as regards Herr Hitler.
Yeah. Yeah, we were so appalled when we discovered how many things we were worse than he was. It was mind-boggling. Mara also mentioned the case for reparations by Coates. We did talk about that for a while on one of our Zooms. Mara, if I can figure out which one it was, I'd be happy to let you know that.
Peggy?
Yes, Dennis.
Yeah, I want to offer as a definition I learned about race while I was in college. I took this course called Race and Race Relations.
Mm-hmm.
It was taught by Cornell West. And he basically said that you have the dominant group, say here on top, and the subordinate group on bottom. And the definition of race is fluid because, you know, one group wants to identify another group, the subordinate group, as something, and a subordinate group resists and names what they want to identify with, and the result of the two is gives you a somewhat fluid definition of race. So that's all I want to offer.
Yeah, thank you, Dennis.
Certainly true.
Yeah. Skip, did you want to weigh in on anything at this point?
It's been a fascinating conversation. I've been so quiet because right after the prayer, a huge molar crown came loose in my mouth.
Oh,
And I'm just trying to hold it until tomorrow.
Don't talk then if you don't want to. I just wanted to make sure you.
No, it's been fascinating. I think, let me just finish up a little bit on what Dennis brought up. Of course, race is purely a social construct. And not everybody today who is considered white was considered white generations back. They got accorded that privilege, I think, as pressure mounted to see what population groups and all were growing. So the whole immigration law is biased as hell against some Europeans, Italians, Greeks, surprisingly, although they consider them the founders of civilization, were not really welcome in this country. Jews are still not totally considered white because of all the stuff that people want to do to them. So basically, it boiled down to Germanic and Anglo-Saxon peoples originally controlling it and then letting in as necessity dictated.
Yeah, thank you. Jerry?
Yeah, you know, Skip just made me think about listening to all of this. And, you know, frankly, first thing I want to say is, Jack, I think I didn't see the play, and it's amazing what I'm hearing. Amazing. And we have to applaud every effort. It's never going to be perfect. Every effort that each of us makes in this struggle is never going to be perfect, and we can't sacrifice the good to make it excellent. So, you know, we're not going to get it all perfect. But Skip, what you just said made me think that we've got to come to grips with where we are right now. It isn't, we keep talking about what's happened in the past, and the past, the history has to inform what we're doing now. And I think that's the struggle. We are in a seminal moment. We're in a moment in this country, maybe in the world, but in this country, we're in a seminal moment about what we do to prevent a slide back, because we're sliding back. We see it, we hear it. And so while understanding the past and the history is deeply, deeply important, I am very scared about the future. And I think we've got to focus our energy, you know, yes, Maureen, reparations, but it's even more than that at this point. It's deeper than that at this point, because I'm afraid of where we're going.
Jerry, can I just
Yeah, thank
join you in that?
Yeah.
That is one reason why I think we're seeing such a battle over education.
Yeah.
Because if you think about it, public education has done or was doing something that I think was really phenomenal. Does anyone in this room really think you would have seen the 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 battle about the equality of all kinds of peoples that you've seen, gender equality, um, sexual orientation, sexual identity equality? So much of that was coming because of the education of our young people. And the same thing about their whole poo-pooing of the racial construct. And I think that what we're seeing now is a ferocious battle to put lids and caps on all of that and send things backward. But this younger generation was doing some phenomenal and has done, I think, some phenomenal things to push this society forward. And I really see, yeah, for me, I look at education totally from the lens of what was happening and what they're trying not to have happen anymore.
Which is why your play, Jack, you know, awesome. Any way to educate people and let them just struggle and see the issues and talk about it. I mean, I wish it could go, you know, worldwide here, because
I'm working hard to place it in other
that's
theaters.
good, Jack. Thank you.
We told all the actors and actresses that night that they need to take this on the road. So we had a lot of questions planned, in case you all didn't have questions, discussing how it depicted structural racism and the connection and what's happening right now in this current environment, as Skip, you said so poignantly. But I'm looking at the clock, and I know we don't have time for that. But I did want to tell you just a couple of things. Kathy Yunkin and I did attend the SBCLT community event. For those who are not aware, our reparations is our racial equity fund, and we're trying to we've teamed up with a Black-led organization in a neighborhood for affordable housing in that area. And so we attended their event this past weekend and heard about the progress on the properties, and it was really good. She gave an update on everything. Robin Lewis was there, one of our representatives, and she's wonderful. She happens to be District 46, which is ours, Jack's, and a few of us. So anyway, she does a great job. Anyway, she mentioned some of the grants that Robin had gotten, and also that Luke Klippinger had gotten for them. And so things are definitely moving now. And she did recognize St. Vincent's and told everybody how much she appreciated our support and what we're doing. So anyway, that was very nice. Also, I wanted to mention that Monday at City Hall, it will be, there's a rally, it's a march and then a rally. The march is starting at 1 Light Street at 4 o'clock, and then 4:30 outside City Hall to then go into City Council meeting, which starts at 5. And that's for the more pressure to pass the inclusionary housing bill 22-0195, and also the tax credit bill. You don't need to know the number. So anyway, if you can join us, please do. That's this coming Monday. And also, I just wanted to mention that next month we will meet on the 20th. And please let Skip or me know if you have any interest in bringing a topic to the group or discussing it. And if you'd like to present anything, we would appreciate it. Okay.
I see in Maura's in the chat, she mentions a thing called Who We Are, a Chronicle of Racism in America. Something for this group to think about.
All right, thank you. Oh, by Jeffrey Robinson. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mara. And please, anybody who's just joined us for the first time, you're welcome to join us anytime. And we will be putting a summary and just the recording on the website. If you choose to look at any of the previous ones, which have been going on, like I said, from September of 2020, it's under, if you go to stbchurch.org and go over to Justice and Service and then scroll down to Racial Equity, then you'll find a page with a link to all the meetings and all the recordings. So you're welcome to watch any of them, and you're welcome to join us in the future. And I want to thank you all for your participation, and thank you particularly, Jack. We so appreciated you coming. And yes, and Mary Ann is going to close us with the prayer.
Holy One, we thank you for your presence among us this evening and always. We thank you for Jack, for the gift of his creativity and commitment, for the painful experiences he has opened before us, for the gift of the questions and the discomfort he has ignited within and among us. May what we have learned and felt take root in our minds and hearts. May we use these gifts to further our quest for racial justice and for radical inclusivity. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thank you very much, Mary Ann. Anybody have any parting words? If not, I'll see you all when I see you.
Okay.
Thanks again. And
Good
thank
night.
you again, Jack.
Peggy?
Yes, let me
Yeah.
stop the recording just a second.
Yeah, whenever